Assalamu alaikum and good morning from Southern California and from the platform of the Halim School of Church Music and Worship. It is indeed my pleasure this morning and evening. Brother Tharwat Wahba, good evening.
Good morning to you. Good evening for who are in the evening now. I'm so happy to be with you.
Well, thank you very much. So this is indeed a pleasure for me. We are having an incredible and fascinating conversation this morning and evening around the world. And I would like to introduce first of all my guest today, and then I will share a story why this interview is crucial for all of us this morning. I would like to introduce our guest as Brother Reverend. Are you Reverend Brother also?
Yes.
Reverend Dr. Tharwat Wahba, PhD, London School of Theology, 2009, author of the book, The Practices of Mission in Egypt. And this is a powerful resource, especially for those who want to understand the practices of mission, the past, the present, and the future of a mission, especially in a Muslim context. But why I have picked this book and why Brother Wahba? First of all, I will start with the one story. I think pre-COVID 2018 or 19, I was in Pakistan, my home country, and I was on my ethnographic research about religious music culture in Pakistani context. And I was scheduled for an interview with a larger mosque in Karachi city. This was the Jamia Masjid, and a big mosque. And it was a time of prayer, although, but he agreed, the imam agreed to give me interview. So while there was a azan, and I asked him, what is the history of azan? And he told me the dream about all this is another story. You can read my upcoming book and and my dissertation anyway for that story. But the most important story, what I would like to tell you, I said the style of kirat, the recitation, the style of recitation which you are reciting, is this from Saudi Arabia or from where? Because we think that everything from a Muslim perspective or the Muslim practice is coming from Saudi Arabia. But to my surprise, he told me that the style of recitation in Pakistan is from Egypt. This is not Arabian Kirat. And that was so fascinating to me. I said, really? And then now I will come to you because we are talking about not only a 200 years of history, but I'm going back just for a brief introduction. The importance of Egypt or the Misr, those who don't know. 5,000 years ago almost, God called Moses, and the story and the exodus of the Israelites started even before that, when Joseph went to Misr and Egypt, and God sent him ahead. And then the whole Israelite nation, how many people they will come out in the Exodus narrative. And then we see that all this story go back to the New Testament, and Jesus took refuge as a child in Misr, in Egypt. And after that, on the New Testament book of Acts, Apollos of Alexandria, he established a church in Ephesus along with, on the Corinthians, along with the Paul. And then we saw that the first ever Old Testament translation in Greek language come out from Alexandria. Not only that, if we come to the under the monastic era, the first ever monasticism, the monastery Catherine of Siena, one of the oldest monastery, is also there. The root of mysticism are in Egypt. Then we see under the Islamic room the Crusades, and then the Islamic's world's most famous Jamiatul Azhar is also in Egypt. So what we can say about Egypt, it is a huge long history. And now I will give time and conversation to Dr. Tharwat Wahba concerning his book. And Dr. Tharwat, my question is, what is the need of a book on history of the mission in Egypt, and how it is different from any other resources?
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Eric, very much for this introduction and for the opportunity you are giving me to talk with my brothers and sisters. I will not answer all the questions as you put. I will share with you a presentation that will cover most of the ideas I want to cover. But yes, this question you mentioned, I need to answer first because I didn't cover this in my presentation.
Okay.
But also, before I start, I want to continue in telling stories from the history. You gave a very good introduction on Egypt, and it's biblical in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and you took us through history until Middle Eve. But let me tell you that in the history I'm going to talk about, in the 19th century, I will talk about the American Presbyterian mission that came into Egypt. And when I was researching my topic, I went to the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia. And I checked many documents there. And part of the documents were the board of foreign mission in the United Presbyterian Church of North America. And this is the church that sent missionaries into Egypt. And the General Assembly of the United Presbyterian Church of North America that our church was part of until 1958. And I found that Synod of the Nile was part of the 14 synods of the United Presbyterian Church of North America. And it was one of two synods that are outside of America that were part of that. Synod of the Nile, and the second one was the Synod of the Punjab, which later on became Pakistan. So we are cousins. We came from the Presbyterian Church in Pakistan and the Presbyterian Church of Egypt. The Protestant work came from the same root, from the same mission stream from the US after a revival happened there. And they came, and I found that in the minutes, I have minutes of the American Presbyterian mission, and the Presbyterian Historical Society, I had it in microfilm. And on this microfilm, I have minutes of Egypt, minutes of Sudan, because Sudan was part of Egypt mission, and minutes of the Punjab, or the work in India, of course, that time, which became Pakistan 1947.
47,
and
yes.
48. So it's amazing to find that we share things. And in my study also, I found that there was a Pakistani leader of the church came to Egypt at 1964. I forget his name now. I didn't prepare for that, but I remember that. He came to Egypt to study the context of the church in Egypt, and he wrote a book on his visit to Egypt, and he was amazed by the work of the church, but also he was criticizing some of the practices of the Egyptian pastors at that time. So we are close, and we have similar backgrounds. We are from a majority Muslim countries, and we share almost the same challenges through our history.
Brother Wahba, it is indeed, yeah, that is fascinating, because I found out various correlation and resonates along with each other. Yes, Muslim context, yes, Presbyterian American mission, and not in even that, I saw a fascinating story which you shared that was about Indian Maharaja. He was son of Raja Duleep Singh.
Yes.
He was the son of the Raja Ranjit Singh, who
Yes.
was ruler of Punjab area. And that was interesting that during that time, during Civil War era, that
Yes.
Raja Duleep Singh has helped American missions in the Egypt. I think that because his wife from a missionary background in Egypt.
So this is a very important story, and it's part of the history of the seminary where I serve. There are many stories, but to make it short, he was visiting Egypt and he got to know the missionaries, and his name is Dolip Singh, and they find him an Egyptian wife,
Yes.
or a wife that was living in Egypt. She's an Ethiopian German background, and her name is Bamba. And he married her, and he donated a boat on the Nile to the American mission after he left, and he sent donation. And in this boat, the Evangelical Theological Seminary started in this boat. And I have a
Ah,
picture in my
okay.
presentation about this boat called Ibis that was given by the Maharaja. He bought it from the American mission, but when he left, he donated back to the American mission, and they used it for ministry. Part of it was the seminary.
So
Uh,
That is our Punjabi contribution to our Egyptian theological education. Wow, such a
Absolutely.
fascinating history.
So it's a small world.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to our conversation. So,
Yes.
what is the need of this book
Sure.
and this topic today?
Yes. The need of our book is this history we are talking about. We didn't find it in Western books. Most of the books we are studying in our seminaries and in the area of scholarship, it's from a Western perspective.
Yes.
Even our theology here in Egypt and in Pakistan, it is not our original theology.
Yes.
Although in Egypt it started in Egypt, but it was taken by Augustine and reformers and went to the West and came back after Reformation, as I will mention. But there is no refer to our context. They stopped by the Crusades, as you stopped. And when you mentioned Egypt and its connection with the church, we stopped in the Crusades. After the Crusades, in the uh, church history books, or in mission books, you didn't find anything about the majority Islamic world and our churches and our struggles. You didn't find almost anything, as if there is no church here. Also, even in the history of mission, they start by William Carey and Hudson Taylor. There is no mention of missionaries from India, from Pakistan, from Egypt, from Sudan, who went themselves for mission work. Also, these books, I'm not criticizing, I'm describing what is going on.
Yeah.
And that's because we didn't write ourselves as people from the majority world. We didn't write ourselves. We didn't see mission from our own perspective.
Agree.
That's why this is something I wrote my book because of that. Plus, there are manuscripts and primary sources that I found nobody used. Of course, the minutes of the American Presbyterian Mission and the documents I found in the Presbyterian Historical Society that few people used in their writings. But the most important part of my work was picking the minutes that were written in Arabic for the mission and for the synod and for the Egyptian missionaries and the Egyptian pastors. So these are treasures. Nobody knows about them. So I wanted the world to know about them. I wanted us to describe our perspective. How did we receive the mission and the impact of the mission into our culture, into our people, into our church, and in the spiritual atmosphere in our area. And after the missionaries left, what happened? Did the church die? Is it continuing? And even before the missionaries came, some people, I joke, Americans, and I told them, of course, Christianity came to Egypt when the American missionaries came at 1854. Some of them, yes. I said, no, it was born here in Egypt and in the Middle East. To tell our story from our own, to use our resources, and to tell our people that we have our own contribution. So these are some of the reasons that led me to write my book.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. I want to show you again the book title. it is, and I'm going to read. It's a Tharwat Wahba, the practice of mission in Egypt. But if you go over in the bottom line, it says that a historical study of the integration between the American mission and the Evangelical Church of Egypt, 1854, 1970. Now, what's happened between these centuries? That's very important
Yes.
because
Yes.
mostly people, as our brother said, that this has happened, but at the same time, why Pakistan is important? Why we shared a lot of history, especially from the Presbyterian mission and the American mission perspective, because at the same time, the American Mission Board, which was UPCNA at that time, so they decided and started mission, which they called India Punjab Mission at that time in Indian subcontinent, and the same time in Egypt. So that's why our connection at that time, Raja Duleep Singh and the Raja Ranjit Singhs during the same era. However, I will let Brother Tharwat will cover that area. But why 1970? Because that was a time when, because of Arab-Israel war and the union of the Islamic organization, which hosted in Pakistan, by the way, because just 2 weeks ago, last month, they hosted their 47th session, which they called OIC, and that was a time when majority of the Western missionaries, they were asked by the local governments to go back to their country because of their alliance with the Israel and Arab-Israel war with the opposite side. So this is what's happened. And now I will let Brother Tharwat to share the story of mission, which me as a Punjabi Pakistani and Brother Tharwat as an Egyptian missiologist is going to share with us. So I'm now making Brother Tharwat host, and he will share his screen and the presentation which he prepared. And especially those who are interested in mission, what's happening right now, what God is doing, and what is the future of the contextual missiology. This is very important and integral conversation. Brother Tharwat, you are now host.
Thank you. Okay, the practice of mission in Egypt. I will start talking about Egypt as a mission field, as a receiving field of missionaries. The uniqueness of the early church in Egypt, I think Eric covered some of it, the Bible manuscripts and Bible translation that started and created in Egypt and plus the whole world. Worship contextualization, ancient Egyptian forms. So contextualization is not a new form or a new term that we are using in mission, but it was applied in Egypt when the worship in Egypt was identified by the ancient Egyptian hymns and forms in construction, in the temple, in many things. Of course, there was a school of theology in Alexandria that started in late 2nd, early 3rd century and continued until 5th and 6th century. Monasticism, as Eric mentioned, started in Egypt by St. Anthony, and it penetrated the whole world, and especially in Europe. Defense of faith, Athanasius, who contributed in the canon of the Bible, in Nicene Creed, and in writing about the incarnation logos. He came from Egypt. Sacrificial church, the church in Egypt called the Church of Martyrs or Martyrdom, is very high time and era and concept in the Egyptian church. And mission work also, the Egyptian church in the early centuries sent missionaries either to Europe, to Nubia, to Ethiopia, to Switzerland, to Ireland. And also there was a deep connection between Egypt and the church in Ethiopia. Also, one of the leaders of the Alexandria School of Theology, actually the Dionysius, the founder of it. Is it Dionysius? I'm not sure of the name. He went as a missionary into India, but we don't have a lot on his work there and his ministry. This is an area we need to discover and to find out what did he do there in India. I will jump into the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, because there is a lot to say. So there were missions into Egypt before the American mission came to Egypt at 1854. Francis of Assisi, he was like a missionary in Egypt when he came in the 13th century to talk with one of the Ayyubid sultans in one of the late crusades. And he talked with him about his faith. And the sultan liked Francis and heard with him. And he praised his courage to come and talk in a peaceful way. And he allowed him to minister in the Holy Land and in Egypt. And from then, the Franciscans are in Egypt and in the Middle East. A Lutheran missionary came in the 17th century, but he was here for only 1 year. And later on, he left to Ethiopia for a ministry. But one of the most important and unique missionaries who came to Egypt are the Moravians. And the Moravians came to Egypt in the 18th century from 1752 to 1782. And they did a great ministry, and there are books in German about their minutes and their memories here in Egypt. They served by distributing Bibles, by doing medical ministry, and by evangelizing people in Cairo and in a village in Upper Egypt in the south, southern part of Egypt. And they didn't establish a church, and we don't know the results of their ministry because it was a very long time ago and they didn't leave a church. The CMS, or Church Mission Society of the Church of England, came to Egypt from 1818 in short visit, and then from 1823 in a long-term mission with missionaries from Germany and from the UK, and they stayed in Egypt until 1863 when the last missionary died and they stopped their work. At that time, they built schools, hospitals, they evangelized it, but they didn't establish a church. They left the country 1863, but then they get back at 1882 with the British occupation to Egypt. And they start working in the same way, hospitals, schools, evangelism, until 1923, when they established the first Anglican church in Egypt at that time. Both Moravians and CMS.
Before going to the next one, I would just like to pitch in two things concerning Francis of Assisi and CMS. So Francis of Assisi is, if anybody know the history of this peacemaking during the Third Crusade, and when Francis of Assisi went inside the war zone and he talked with the Sultan, and that was. And the historian says that Sultan was from a Sufi sect. So that's why when Francis of Assisi was there, and Francis of Assisi first time realized the 5 time of prayer, 5 time azan, and that's when he later come back to Europe, and when he settled and established his own Franciscan order by the approval of Vatican, the 5 bells that was adopted from a Muslim practice into the Franciscan order. So that's number one. The CMS, as Brother Wahba said, at the same time, CMS came to the part of the world which is now, it was Indian subcontinent. And also, this is also giving me an answer which mostly mission students, and especially myself, Pakistani, being a Pakistani, I always confuse that why Western mission put us with the Middle East, why we are not part of the Indian subcontinent culture. And that's the historical roots that Pakistan is always tag in with the Middle Eastern Arabic speaking world rather than Urdu Hindi speaking world with the Indian subcontinent because of the historical missions. And that's how they see Pakistan with the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and all stans. And they think that we are Arabs. We are not Arabs. We speak Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, and our culture background is Indian subcontinent, not Middle Eastern. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. So the approach of both the Moravians and CMS was to help the existing Coptic Orthodox Church at that time not to have a new church. They thought that if we reformed the current native church, it will be the best approach to change the country and to share the gospel. But it came that it was very hard dream to fulfill. And that's why the American Presbyterian Mission has a different idea and a different approach.
Brother Wahba, I have a question here to you.
Yes, please.
So, what's happened with the Coptics? Although you mentioned a few things in your book, but why, when Coptic Church was already there, rather than working with the existing historical Coptic Church, why there was a need of establishing an Evangelical Church?
Okay, let me. You are taking me to run. Let me stop here in the state of the Coptic Orthodox Church.
Okay. You can answer later on, no problem. You can answer me later on, but that just popped in my mind and I thought might be...
No, I will answer this. This is part of the context when the American mission came into Egypt, and they found that the Coptic Orthodox Church that was very powerful in the first 5 centuries. But then after the after the Chalcedon, the Council of Chalcedon, there was a split, and the Coptic Church was left behind. And when Islam came, it became more isolated from the global church. And it struggled. There were some, of course, times when the church was strong, when it has some good leadership to defend the faith, and some people who wrote in Arabic about their faith and apologetic materials to explain their faith. But the church declined under Islam to reach its lowest point in the 19th century. At that time, and this is the witness of leaders from the Coptic Orthodox Church and Coptic Orthodox historians, they said that the church didn't have any kind of organization, no teaching, no pastoral care. Most of the priests were ignorant. They didn't go to schools. They didn't know to read and write. They recite the Mass in Coptic language. They didn't understand, and the people didn't understand, because it was going to be a dead language. Nobody is using the Coptic language in daily lives. And there was corruption, and they used black magic. Some of the priests, they used black magic in their practices. So, and the Bible was not available. The Bible was only in Coptic, and it was in the hands of very limited number of people. So the gospel disappeared. The true Christianity didn't continue in the Coptic Orthodox Church. So there was a need, and the trials of the Moravians and the CMS didn't work. Still, the church resisted the change, and they didn't allow missionaries to work later on. And when the American mission came and they tried to reach out the whole country, I will talk about this now, yes. But one of the missionaries whom I will mention later on, he said that we cannot preach the gospel to Muslims until we remove from their way the stumbling block they are finding. And the stumbling block in his idea was the Christians of Egypt, the Copts. who didn't give a good example of right followers of Christ. If he wants to tell the gospel for Muslims and he wants them to change to be Christians, so they think you want us to be like those. So it was a stumbling block. So that's why the American Presbyterian Mission wanted to reform, but it didn't work. So they started to have their own church, or I
Got you.
mean the
No, that's one.
Protestant or Presbyterian Church of Egypt, to be the tool to evangelize the whole country.
Well, thank you very much. This is a lesson for all of us. Even as in Pakistan, we are also part of the more than a century years old church right now. But compared to the Coptic Church, which was more than 2,000 years old church at that time, we need to learn a lesson that whether you are a historical church, whether you are a hierarchical church, whether you have lots of resources at that time, but if you failed to resist, if you fail and you resist to change, you don't integrate and you don't adopt contemporary cultural relevancy to the gospel, to your culture, you are going to be seized. So that's what's happened. We are learning from the Coptic Church, and this is a lesson for all churches, even how big you are, how historic you are. If you don't establish your contextual, culturally relevancy theology and missional practices, you are going to be vanish. Yes, Brother Bob.
Absolutely. I want to give 2 points here. One, continue for the history, and one to comment on your point. Cyril the Fourth was a very enlightened patriarch of the Coptic Orthodox Church, but he ruled very short time from 1853 to 1861. And his time was very rich, tried to reform by establishing schools, teaching the clergy, organizing the church. He imported a press from outside to print books for his people. But his time was very short, and he was called Cyril the Reformer, or the father of Reformation in the Coptic Orthodox Church. But after he passed away, there was another patriarch who came, and he had persecution and discrimination against the Protestants who were emerging at that time. Going back to your comment, Eric, yes, God wants a life church to work with it, because his spirit is alive. And when we are not in the line of the work of the Holy Spirit, we are a stumbling block in front of the world that they will not know, because we don't proclaim the gospel, we don't tell the gospel message to them. And it's true about the Coptic Orthodox Church, but now the Coptic Orthodox Church is becoming more open to the work of the Spirit, more open for the gospel, more open for the Bible, and God is using enlightened pastors, priests, and bishops in the Coptic Orthodox Church doing his work. On the other hand, our Protestant churches, sometimes when they are active in knowing God's will and God's word, they are doing great. But sometimes when they neglect the call of their existence of being missional, of sharing the gospel, of not being centered around themselves, church-centered people, but to be mission-centered people going out and proclaiming the gospel. If we don't do that, one of my comments to the American mission, when I commented on their work among Muslims and the hesitation of both the mission and the Egyptian church of doing that, I said that the American mission moved a stumbling block, or they added another one.
That's a very critical question. Yes, I agree with you. And this is a question to all those who are watching, that are you a stepping stone or are you a stumbling stone? That's you need to decide. And especially because our brother Wahba is talking about in the context of American mission in Egypt and from Pakistan, I would like to state that majority of the Western missionaries, they are becoming, I'm sorry to say, but this is happening, they are becoming a stumbling stone rather than a stepping stone. Why? The reasons we will find out through our brother Wahba, that what were the practices and what were the historical context of the middle of 20th century Egypt when American mission started work, and here we are.
Sure. I shared about the context of the church, but the context of the country, Egypt, was in a very bad condition. There were some reforms that happened by the Muhammad Ali and his dynasty, but this reformation touched only the elite, very thin group of people in the top who are the owners of lands and businesses, and they have the privilege of being in the government and traveling to study abroad. But the grassroots, 95% of the people were in a very bad condition. This is an Egyptian village in the 19th century or late 19th century. This is a souk, or a market, and you see people are in a very poor condition. This is Cairo, and this is the citadel of Muhammad Ali and Saladin. And now this is a highway close to our seminary here, but it was in a very primitive time. And flood, when the Nile was flooded, it covers most of the land of Egypt. The Islamic style in life and education was dominating. The leaders of the community were only the religious leaders. There was no political life at that time. Education, we didn't have schools at that time, only kutabs, which is the Islamic school that teach only read and write and some mathematics and reciting the Quran. And similar to that, there were kutabs in the Coptic Orthodox side, very few of them to teach the Egyptian Coptic children. So the life in Egypt was very poor, and they needed a revival. They needed a change. And God opened the door through many things to open the door for women to hear the gospel, for kids to have education, to villages and cities, to look for these kids. They are all, they don't have choices, all of them. And it was common in Egypt until 1950s. So it was very hard time. The rulers like Khedive Ismail tried to do some reformation, but also it was only in certain places. And it was in a very high cost that he borrowed lots of money from Europe. And in the end of the day, because of his economic decisions, Egypt became under the British occupation. We talked about the Coptic Church. So this was briefly the context of Egypt at that time. In the middle of 19th century, the population of the country was about 5 million people. There was a need in education and medical support and medical ministry. There was a need in educating people in illiteracy, in also the atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere in Egypt. There was a need for God to interfere into this darkness that the country was going through.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this kind of background and a context. So the mission arrived in this all this depletable situation, and they saw the opportunities. So what were the mission methods they adopted at that time?
Sure. The American Presbyterian mission started to come at 1854 when one of the missionaries in Syria and Lebanon was sick, and he came to Egypt to get medication in 1952, and he wrote back to the board and his mission asking them to come to Egypt. To make it short, they sent 3 missionaries, a couple from the US and a single and this is the single one from the Lebanese or Syrian mission, and they came into Egypt at November 1854, and they start by. I'll go back to John Hawk. They did mission Nile trips using this is the ibis, the boat I talked about in the beginning of my talk that the Maharaja gave to the mission.
Okay. So this is the board by the Duleep Singh donated to the American missions in Egypt.
Yes, and they used that to do mission trips in the Nile, and through this mission trips, they shared the gospel with different people, and they distributed Bible, especially in the southern part of Egypt, and they met with people and they paved the way for establishing the church. They used schools, and schools were a very important tool until now. One of the most powerful methods for the Egyptian church to penetrate and to serve the country and to get involved in the life of the country were through schools. In one time, the American mission and the Egyptian Presbyterian Church, they had a number of schools, more than the number of schools that the government had in the beginning of the 20th century. And here you can see this is a girls' school, and this is the wife of the Maharaja, Bamba.
Okay.
Here she is here. Then also they had work among women, and this work happened through women missionaries and wives of missionaries, and this work was for them to visit homes, because women were not allowed to go outside of their homes, and we say that they allowed to go outside of their homes twice in their lives. Most of the people, first to marry, so she moved from her parents' house to her cousins maybe house to marry, and then the second time when she dies and they carry her body to be buried. So it was very, very often very hard situation. So when the missionaries decided to work among women by visiting them, doing Bible study and reaching them, teaching them things for their living, daily living, they used also hospitals. The American mission established some hospitals, Sunday schools, and it was new for Egypt for kids. When we say Sunday school, we mean kids ministry. Bible distribution, they have a section of distributing the Bible in many areas using the Van Dyke Arabic translation. And they needed to recruit nationals also for ministry. And this is one of the most important contribution of the American mission they did in Egypt by raising up a new generation of Egyptian native leaders for the church, establishing the church and preparing leaders of the church. And I'm going to talk about
I will come to this 3 cell formula, but I have a question on this one. So you are saying that the methods of the missions were education and medical and Zanana ministry, or the women's when they reach out to women, and the children, and the Bible translation. So my question is still, I don't know the ratio of literacy rate in Egypt, what is today literacy rate, but in Pakistan it is around 60 plus something percentage. It's very low. Even people can't read and write properly, the majority of the people in a rural settings. But however, a century ago it was even lesser than that. What do you think, that would this Bible distribution, a literary approach, worked in Egypt, or what's happened?
Yes, our illiterate percentage is very close to the one in Pakistan nowadays, but it was the same, like exactly Pakistan in that time. So part of the work of the American mission and the Egyptian church later on was illiterate programs. And they did this through village schools and through literacy programs. And later on, if I have time, I will talk about the the work of the church in literacy or village programs in the mid of 20th century, using this and using the Bible as a textbook. So in many villages until now, you find old people, they don't know to read or to read anything but the Bible. They cannot read but the Bible because they learned to read only the Bible, and the mission and the church helped them into this. So, and there was a statistic that one of the missionaries called Charles Watson did at 1908, and he compared the educational level of the Protestants, compared them with Muslims and other Christians, and he said that by far the percentage of educated people in the Protestant side is higher than other people. And that's because of the church schools and the literacy programs and reading the Bible in churches and using it as a textbook. So yes, they did great in that.
Okay, so it's a follow-up question. Do you have any examples of culturally or orally transmitted or the orally engagement in the methods of the mission, or was all these 3 or 4 areas?
No, our culture is an oral culture. So the missionaries and the church, actually the church more than the missionaries, did great work in doing oral things. Orality is very important in Egypt. So now there are many material that the Bible Society did, many churches did about putting the Bible in an everyday life language, telling the Bible in the form of a story or of a local music, colloquial Arabic. So we are very advanced in that. Also having drama, singing in Arabic. Now we are getting out from the hymns that we had from the missionaries and the Western style of hymns from the Psalms, the book that we had. I appreciate it and I like to sing from it, but we have our own music that is adjusted to our culture, and our own singers and writers who are writing, and people are memorizing that. And Bible is very central in Egypt. When I go and preach in any Egyptian village, I'm from a village, and if you go to any village, and you are, of course, you not you, but any Arabic speaking, he goes to the village, and he used the Bible in his preaching. When just he started the verse, everybody in the will recite the verse, and they know the Bible by heart. So this is something unique also in our oral culture. People, they don't know to read and write. They can memorize the Bible and recite it themselves. So it is something unique in our oral.
No, thank you very much. Now let's come to the point which you were trying to think. I would say that I don't know whether we call it infamous or a famous 3-self formula. Critiqued a lot. You also critique on that 3-self formula in your book. How you see that 3-self formula as someone sitting somewhere in the mission field, and they have some kind of a formula, just like a scientific formula, and they try to apply on a living beings, and how that work out in Egypt, because it's also impacted a lot to Pakistan also. I have my own
Yes.
critique, but I would like to listen first your.
Yes. When I did my research, I did it and I was in London, and I found there were dynamics between the American and
Yeah, I'm losing your voice. I'm losing your voice.
sorry, can you hear now?
Yes, it's clear. Yeah.
Okay. So when I did my research in London, I came through this dynamics, and I found that there were a kind of dynamics. in the leadership, in financial support, in doing mission. And I didn't know about the three selves. So when I found this, I thought I knew it from the practice of the mission and the prayer before I read the theory that was founded at close to the end of the 19th century by Anderson and Allen. And when I found it, yes, that's it. This is what is going on the church in Egypt. So the three selves, self-governing and self-support and self-propagate. The self-governing, which means that the native church, that the mission established can have its own leaders, can govern itself. And to do this, we have to raise up a generation of leaders. And part of that was to have Egyptian people to work in the mission. So we have Egyptian people who gave to Protestant churches. They built churches. They built schools. Rich people from Egypt. They didn't study theology. Also, leaders of the community that went to do apologetics. They were the elders of the church. And leaders of the church from a Bedouin background who became the first leader of the Protestant church in front of the government to represent the church at 1876 in front of the government. And these are lay people and pastors, the early generation of leaders in the Egyptian church, whom the mission tried to encourage and try to help. Do you know Ramiz Atallah, Eric?
Who?
Ramiz Atallah
No.
from Egypt, with the Bible Society and was Lausanne movement, and he's a very known figure. This is his grandfather.
Okay.
Here, Ramiz is very known in the international circles. Anyhow, but this is his grandfather. And part of that is to establish the seminary in order to prepare pastors who are going to be the leaders, the governors of the church. And our seminary started 1863, the Evangelical Theological Seminary. It started in the boat and in moving with the missionaries until its location where I'm talking from 1926 here in Cairo. Nowadays, our seminary has more than 500 students.
Wonderful.
Doing in different programs, starting from Master of Arts in Theology, Master of Divinity, Media and Leadership, and Mission Counseling. And now we are having a D-Men with in the Middle Eastern context from Fuller, by the way. Fuller will start this program with us next year, or this year actually, in October. And we are about to have a PhD program, a regional PhD program. So the seminary played a major role in preparing leaders for the church. Here is the seminary in 1904 with two American missionaries, and these are all of them that are wearing the tarbush.
Yeah, that's what I noted. That is really interesting contextualization of the gowns and the faculty. Rather than wearing a Western gown and a hat, they are wearing this Turkish style. I think, if I'm not wrong, is it Egyptian style or Turkish style?
It's Turkish style that was all over the region.
That time, because
Egypt
of the Ottoman,
yes, this is an
yes.
Ottoman, but it was everywhere in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and
Yeah, okay, wonderful.
North Africa, and so on, until 1950s. Towards independency, self-governing, self-support, and self-propagation. This is the growth of the church in Egypt in the first 50 years. The native ordained workers were zero in 1964 after 10 years, and then 1904, there are 36. Nowadays, we have almost 400 ordained. Other native workers, those who were working with the mission as Bible distributor or chaplains in hospitals or helping the mission in church planting or so, grow from 15 until 39. Organized churches from one church 1964 until 63. This is a rapid growth. In 63, 1904. Nowadays, we are talking about 450 churches. The organized churches of them are more than 300 organized churches, or 307. 143 are new church development, new church planting are taking place in Egypt nowadays.
So, what do you think about this? Because as we are talking about this dependency, self-government, self-propagating, and self-governing, so we need leaders. However, you
Yes.
mention in your book about the dearth of contextual theologians, which these three self-formula masterminds forget to add self-theology, and also a self-missiology. However,
Yes.
during the same time, I'm just, because your timeline is just popping into my mind, you're talking about, because during same time there were two things collided with Pakistan. Number one, Gujarat Theological Seminary established in 1877, and just I think with the difference of a 10 year compared to the mobile boat in Nile. And however, you Cairo, evangelical theology in Cairo are going for a DMin and going for a PhD in a regional. However, we are still stuck with the undergrad and the MD. We are not going beyond, and our praise and hope that may God give us resources and wisdom and leadership to go beyond that. However, the same time, another significant history happened in Pakistan, which was the Book of Psalms, Punjabi Psalter, translated and composed in Indian raga, Indian musicology, which is the backbone of a Christian worship in Pakistan. Was there any kind of a similar work being translated or composed or published as a primary worship resource, or the Book of Psalms in Egypt? Was there any effort or any project there?
Yes, there were many projects that took place in the history of the Egyptian church to compose the hymns or the psalms into Egyptian language. But most of the time, we adopted the Western music in Arabic words. Uh, and it was until 30 years ago. This was the only book in the worship, especially in Sunday morning in our churches. But after that, for different reasons, we needed new style to add to it, not to neglect the old one, but to add to it. And now there is a massive, started even from 1960s, a massive movement of composing, writing, and putting music for Egyptian songs, using the Bible and meditation and explaining a spiritual journey. And we have thousands of music. Some of them are good theological foundation songs and good music, good theology. Others are very popular, very weak, very fragile when you compare them with the hymns, the traditional ones. But these are the things that are penetrating the grassroots in the villages and in the new church development in slums. We have a massive church planting now, and these churches in new areas, they are changing the culture of the church.
Yeah. Okay. So that lead me to another question concerning theological education while we were talking about. So you talk about that media and communication you have added, missions you have added, but is there any like a development for a worship and music studies in a theological education? Is there any future planning or something which is already existing in theological curricula?
Yes, we have in our theological curricula uh, history of worship, contemporary worship, preaching, singing, and music. We have this. Plus, now in the last few years, we started to have a center. We called it Malta Roy Center for Worship and Preaching.
Okay. Can you repeat that? I lost your voice.
Yes, we established a center called Martha Roy Center for Worship and Preaching.
Ah, great.
Martha Roy was an American missionary who was born in Egypt from missionaries and died in Egypt about 12 years ago in year 90, and she was 93 years old when she died, uh, but she left heritage of music and studies in music and courses in music. And she gave some donation to the seminary, and we built this center. And the vision of this center is to make a revival in the worship in the Egyptian church using the old style, but also adding to new styles with good studies, good reflection, theological reflection, train people in leading songs and worship in a biblical way, but also in a modern way. We are building up the vision and the work of this center nowadays.
Well, thank you very much for affirming this because this is what we are trying to do from last 17 years in Pakistan through this Tahleem School of Church Music and Worship, producing culturally relevant and worship studies as an academic discipline, especially helping practicing church musicians as well as pastors as well as theological students in Pakistan. However, okay, let's go back to the. I think we are reaching out to our concluding point. So, in your perspective, does this three self formula worked or failed?
Okay, it worked in some areas and it failed in some. It worked very well in the area of governing. We now the church is fully led by Egyptians. From 1958, it became independent. We are doing not good in self-support. We are supporting our pastors, our local churches, but not supporting mission work and church planting. There is a need to raise support from abroad, but in church and self-propagation, we are reviving in this now in self-propagation and missiologists also. uh, Egypt became a ascending mission, ascending church, and I want to highlight this man, Ahmed Fahmi. Ahmed Fahmi was a Muslim, and he accepted Christ in one of the missionaries' schools, and he couldn't stay in the country, and he went to Edinburgh, studied medicine, and he had a call from London Mission Society to be a missionary, even far than India. He went to China
Ah, okay.
and became a missionary there for 30 years as a doctor. And this is a picture of his retirement. So the church had this mission and propagation in its roots, but we didn't have a place to do it because the mission gave us the perspective that you need to take care of your own church. But later on, we I want to pass all of this. This is Muslim evangelism. I want to run into the mission work into Sudan. And here is a very important mission to Sudan and the struggle between pastoral and mission rules. Roles. Egypt sent a missionary to Sudan, but when he went there at year 19,000, he the American mission pushed the church to send him to be a missionary. But when he went there, he started to gather the Egyptians who were living in Sudan and started the Presbyterian church there. And it was a struggle until now. And I think this is the same struggle the church in Pakistan is facing, that we are a pastoral church, a church-centered church. We are looking inside.
Yeah.
We don't look outside. But nowadays, I take a role in the Egyptian church to be the leader of its mission in evangelism and church planting board of the whole synod in Egypt. For 9 years, I was in this position. And under this ministry, God gave us 143 new churches to be established. Not all of them in my time, but when I left, there was this number. And also we resumed our mission effort to send missionaries from the Synod, from the Presbyterian Church of Egypt, not from a local church or from a para-church, from the Synod. And now we have 6 missionaries, 3 of them in Iraq, 2 in Turkey, and 1 in South Sudan. And we are preparing others to go. And this is because the seminary has a missions department. So theological education is very important to equip the church to be missional church, to evangelize to Muslims, to do church planting, to do mission work. Theological education is very important, and also going out and reaching out others is very important, and this will bring life to the church. If the church doesn't do this, it will die. Full stop.
So what I am hearing, Brother Wahba, you are saying that because of the 3 self formula, that there was a struggle and a tussle because the pastors were product of a theological education, which were not designed to make them missionary.
Right.
They were designed to make them a pastor to take care of the church buildings or the properties or whatever the mission enterprises.
Right.
However, when you realize that we need our contextual missional theology, that's where the role of the department or the center of mission came. When through that center you prepared local missionaries and they were gone and prepared for the work. So but there was also a financial glitches. So how did you meet that? Because when I'm just reading your notes and I'm quoting you now, you might be respond to that, which says that and from the preface it said that this study also examined the ecclesiastical, missiological and administrative relationship. So, how does, in the post missionary flight after 1960, how does this ecclesiastical, missiological, you told me, and administrative relationship developed? What were the internal and external challenges for that relationship?
Yes. Because we were depending upon the American dollar for many years, when the Americans stopped supporting some areas, especially when their theology was changed. The theology changed in 1950s from being conservative, evangelical, missional to be a more liberal, social gospel and towards social ministry. The church in Egypt dropped into this phenomena as well, and it started to focus on the gospel, the social gospel. But there were times when we lost the vision for mission. But when the seminary started the mission department, this spirit came back again. So it's very important, and this happened because we looked carefully to the situation of the church. We looked back to the history and we saw that there are heritage we received from the Americans that it doesn't work nowadays. We need to get rid of some of it to do our work, because they did the church planting, the mission, the medical, the education. we did only church business. So when they left, we left by church business. But then we realized that no, we cannot leave the outreach, the church planting, the mission work, and other parts of ministry. So we are coming back. So theological education is very important.